Just throwing this out. While the instructions are quite good in terms of, you know, listing off all the pieces you're going to need for each sort of section, they don't come with diagrams. So unless you're really familiar with bolt sizes and diameters and whatnot, really handy to have a set of calipers around, because so when I'm looking for an M6L20, I know that looks around 20 millimeters to me, but I want to be sure about that, and that is a 20 mil, and yeah, that's an M6, I already know that. Here we go. Little tip for you. So here I'm installing the ambient temperature sensor, which is in one of the locations that you would have seen earlier when I've drilled out and installed some riv nuts. Then I switch over to installing the brackets that are going to locate the intercooler on the crash bar itself. The horns are also relocated to those same brackets, so there's a little bit of work just in clocking the piece of metal, I guess you'd call it a bracket, that sits on the back of the horn. Just clocking it around so it now can install in the right location on the bracket, which is on the crash bar. And this is the lower like mounting bracket for the intercooler as well. Just installing that now. All right, I'm going to test fit the intercooler now. You can see now how you've got these brackets to get the horns installed in place. I haven't wired them up yet. I haven't figured out exactly how this is all going to work yet. You've got the ambient air temperature sensor there. Which is, let me see, this guy here. Somehow, because it's not included in this kit, somehow I'm going to have to route wiring through to my dryer, the air conditioner condenser dryer, which is all the way over there. And let me get this bad boy over here. So for some reason the kit doesn't acknowledge that. Yeah, I don't know how that's supposed to work, but anyway, I'll figure it out. All right, let's get this intercooler in place. I'm not going to take the cardboard off just yet, exciting as that is, because I know I'm going to have to take it off again. And you can see the dramas I'm going to have with my oil cooler. Maybe that'll fit behind, but I don't think so. I think this is going to be too thick. I don't know what I'm going to do with that. Anyway. Let's see how we go. And here I'm just installing the mounting bracket on the traction oil cooler, which will eventually then mount to the other side of the intercooler. This was a pretty easy step, so I skipped it for the sake of the video. It's just installing that silicon coupler and the hose clamps to that bracket. Pretty straightforward. Now, as part of the kit, the evap solenoid is actually relocated to the traction oil reservoir bracket. I've been tempted to get rid of it, like just delete it from my setup entirely, but I've heard different stories in forums about people's experiences with deleting it, in terms of what that does to their when they fill fuel and whatnot. So I've decided to keep it for now. This is a section of hose that connects the traction oil reservoir and the oil filter. Hardly glamorous stuff, but it's a step nonetheless. Alright, I want to give a bit of an update on where I'm at right now. In terms of the instruction booklet, therefore the install according to HKS, I'm about 3/4 of the way through, so there isn't much left to go. So I just want to kind of show where it's, what that looks like in terms of the install so far, but also like just the issues that I'm hitting, and it's almost entirely around the complications with having aftermarket parts installed already, and therefore how to work around that. So let me show you. First is that I skipped ahead and didn't bother sort of showing on camera, but I've just positioned this down here. So you can see there's a bracket here that is to hold the filter for the traction oil. So that just bolts in underneath down here in the location on the stock coolant pipe. I mean, you can see some of the other modifications I've made here. I've already blocked off this one that goes up to the throttle body. I've deleted all of that. Here we've got aftermarket and CJM fuel return kit. So next problem I'm going to be dealing with, or one of the problems I'm going to be dealing with, is just relocating the fuel pressure regulator effectively as best as I can figure out in just looking at positions. The traction oil container, which also replaces the bracket for the evap solenoid switch. So that comes off the old bracket, install it on the bracket that comes with the traction oil bottle, but that's going to be positioned somewhere around here, and I'd say there's a 95% chance it's going to hit where I've got my fuel pressure sensor in the regulator there. So just luck of the draw. So I'm going to look at either relocating that to here, which I think is a good spot, certainly gets it out of the way and it becomes still really accessible. And I made sure when I installed my wiring, I gave it some extra clearance or extra length, so it can install sort of anywhere around here, knowing that that might come up. And also, if anything, the fuel pressure regulator from CJM, like the kit, kind of expects the regulator to be a little bit further down, because in terms of where this line, the return line, actually installs into the rails, it actually seems to put a little bit of stress on here. I think it's fine. I don't think there's any chance it was going to sort of rupture, but it was a bit of work to sort of get it to fit nicely there and bolt on. So I think moving it down this way will actually take a little bit of strain off this, and there's certainly room there. Yeah, and eventually this line, the hose will sort of run along here, down this way as I understand it, come down through to where the traction oil cooler will sit, which is about right here. What I'm dealing with currently, and this is probably my biggest jam on this whole install, is just where I would have had my power steering cooler and my oil cooler installed. So the oil cooler sits here normally, power steering cooler would sit here. That's actually a bracket for the new intercooler, so I've already installed that. So I've got to relocate them because basically the intercooler is right up against the radiator support frame. Looking at a couple of options, and one of them is that there is, I've already measured, there is enough clearance between the condenser and where the intercooler would sit. So my oil cooler is 50 mil width. There's probably, I think, just under 60 between here and where the intercooler sits. So there's enough space to do it without any kind of interference. Bit fiddly, but it would mean then you've got a nice compact install of intercooler, oil cooler, condenser, radiator. Not great for heat management, but not terrible either. And the one that I'm sort of most worried about would be the intake temperature. So the intercooler is still uninterrupted up front. And then behind that, you know, managing the oil temp. So one option is to put it in here. It's just going to mean that I'd need to cut a few bits out of here and then create a bracket that's going to somehow attach it on there without getting in the way of anything else. Or do what many else have done before me and find a way to install it here. So at least it's angled in slightly, or out I should say, to be able to catch some air going in, you know, this direction. That ginormous washer reservoir bottle is a pain. I don't know, I'd like to downsize the hell out of it to clear up some space in there. I'm sure there's some aftermarket options there I might look at. And then I've got to figure out what to do with the power steering cooler. So it would be possible to, I think, get it in here somehow, mount it. I'd potentially just create brackets on, oh, maybe, no. Yeah, I've got to check that against the clearance between where the intercooler is and here. So potentially mounted in here. I think the space is probably too tight given the size of this. And if that's the case, yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll look at installing it north-south here. Or if the oil cooler is installed over here, then maybe I can install the power steering cooler here instead. So there's a few options. All of them require me to cut the hoses and drain and, you know, potentially put new hoses in place as well. So I'm not looking forward to that. Given where a couple of other things are sitting right now in terms of this whole project, there's not much I can do about them in the meantime. So I'm just going to jump ahead and do some test fitting of the supercharger itself, and maybe a couple of other bits and pieces, just to see how it all fits together, so I'm across like any other problems coming up. So let's do that. All right, so we've skipped ahead. I'm just going to barrel through and do some other things before I get to some of the more complicated stuff. I'm procrastinating. So one of the funky things this kit gets you to do to make some space for the supercharger location is to do a little relocation, basically clocking the solenoid within the bracket for the cam phaser. So mine are 20 years old now. I'm seeing some issues in terms of the current tune that I've got on them. That may or may not be fixable. They probably are. They're a fairly simple unit, but they do go bad eventually. So rather than take the risk to retune on the old hardware that may or may not have a problem, I've just bought 2 new phasers, so I'm starting from scratch. Now over here to the grand unboxing. Yes. HKS 8555. Yeah. Oh, there we go. English. It's a bit of a beast. So let's just check direction on this. 8555 is this way. Yeah. There we go. It's not light. Yeah, I mean there's a bunch of gears, reduction gears in here. Look, it's one of those things to consider about pros and cons of doing a supercharger kit versus say twin turbos, where the turbos are down in the either in the exhaust banks, like down there near the exhaust ports, or further back near the transmission. Either way, you've got a you've moved that weight to lower center of gravity, whereas these bad boys are obviously going to be located right here, which means you've got weight further up, further forward, so it's above your like forward of your front axles, so it's going to mess with your 50-50 weight distribution more so, but also it's raising weight as well, so your center of gravity is increasing. So just one of those things to consider. And I know if you do a big front mounted single turbo, that's going to be here as well. Is what it is. I mean, when you're installing these things, you don't really worry about that too much. You just work around it. So I'm thinking of actually opening up this restrictor just a touch. I mean, let's have a look here. So this is what we're dealing with. Stock without the restrictor, or with the restrictor, goes down to, it does mention somewhere, I think it's a 48 mil. So let's actually have a look at this. Stock, we're looking at about 70 mil. Yeah, call it 70 mil. And caught it. And if we, I'm just going to put this down. And if we move to the restrictor, I believe, I'm just going to reset. I believe it's a 48 mil. Yeah. What are we talking there? 22 mil reduction. So I've messaged with HKS and they've told me that in stock form, without the restrictor and using the 100mm pulley that I have, so I've got the higher capacity pulley, this is pulling between, or should be able to generate between 12 to 15 psi. With the restrictor, that drops it down to 5 to 8. 8 psi, if that's where I actually get to, is I'm pretty comfortable with that. I guess I'm just trying to maybe bump the range up. If I took anything out, it would literally be like a millimeter, in radius, so 2 mil in diameter. I'd like to get closer to 10, but I'm probably playing with fire there. Maybe 5 to 8 really is probably the safer range to stick with. In trying to install this before, I'm noticing there is a clearance issue. Basically, this sits about here because it's on the inside of the bracket, but it won't let me get, it's like literally like 0.5 millimeter off, but it won't let me get close enough to be able to get the bolt in with this one here. Let me see if I can show you. So this guy here, it's close. So I've marked it. I just used a scribe to mark the line here for where it would sit. Here. So that sits there. Supercharger sitting here, and I've scribed around where it is. So that's just dead space. I've skipped ahead a bit just because I want to do some test fitting. I'd rather, like when I show installation for everything in this video, I'd rather sort of, I can point out where the issues were, but I don't really want to have to stop and figure it out, and it just gets a bit frustrating. So I'm kind of wanting to jump ahead, figure out some of the issues. I can explain what they are and then come back and show the installation. But I mean, thus far you can see I've test fit where most of the things are going to go now. The piping was pretty good. There wasn't too much I needed to do to figure this out. Actually, I think I need to take it off that bracket. But yeah, it was all fit pretty well. No major issues, but I'll explain that. I've jumped ahead to number 10. We'll come back. But this is going to be the vacuum hose that then controls the blow-off valve. So I'm gonna get that too. Yeah, so this ain't no fancy blow-off valve. It's a bit disappointing considering HKS makes some pretty sick blow-off valves and whatnot. I'm sure this obviously does the job, but in this day and age, it's a bit meh looking, very generic. I wouldn't be surprised if it's not even HKS's, but anyway, it's certainly not, it doesn't have their logo anywhere on it. So what I'm doing is getting this in place to be able to function. The first part was getting the 4mm hose that's going to feed off the vacuum port on the front of the plenum, intake plenum. Part of that was to cut down some of the 4mm hose they give you. It's this nice sort of textured rubber stuff. Don't know if it's any better than silicone, but whatever. And then you need 350mm of this 6mm hose. So, say there, 2 there, very scientific. And that's going to go on this end. I used a bit of rubber grease to get it in there because this is very fiddly to try and get a tiny little 4mm pushed into here because there's just no grip, and you sort of start to worry about whether you're going to break it or not. But I think the 6mm might be a bit easier. Yeah. There we go, that's all it needs. And the 6mm is obviously going to connect to that.